shadcn UI has kind of taken over the React landscape as far as what people are talking about these days, and there's good reason for it. It combines React with Tailwind, which is what a lot of people already use, and it uses Radix UI under the hood to give you helpful primitives that are then styled in a really tasteful way. You can style those however you want and go in and actually manipulate the code, because if you're familiar with it, you actually copy those files into your project and then you own them and they're yours at that point. Now, there's been a lot of really helpful videos done in shadcn UI, and I thought about doing my own, but there's so many great tutorials out there, I'm not sure I could add a whole lot to the landscape. But I do think it's important to understand two things that drive the whole process. There's two things. One of them is Radix UI, that's the primitives, and the other one is the CVA library, or the Class Variance Authority library. That actually sets up how you style everything, and it's also how you customize it. Now, whereas Radix is React-based, the CVA library is not. You can use it in anything. In fact, I've used it in many Astro projects myself. So what I want to do this time is focus on that second kind of key component of shadcn UI, and that would be the Class Variance Authority library. What is it? How do you customize it? How do you use it in a real project? We're going to not only look at their examples, but then build out a more robust one, and also add in a couple of other dependencies that are also used by shadcn UI. And I hope understanding how it works under the hood will help you appreciate the actual library itself and be able to customize it to your own project. You ready? All right, let's jump right in. Hey, what's up? My name is Chris, and welcome to Coding in Public. Here you can see I've got this Class Variance Authority project, and I've just got a basic button here. It looks about as ugly as you would imagine for just a normal HTML button. Now, in this example, I happen to be using React and Tailwind, but this is not required for Class Variance Authority. It's just that Tailwind obviously has like a reputation for lots of classes, so it's especially helpful in something like that, but you could, of course, use this when you're writing just standard CSS. Okay, so what does Class Variance Authority solve? Well, it solves having reusable components that you can style and make sure they stay consistent throughout your project. It also gives you a couple extra superpowers, and if we enhance it a little bit with a few other libraries, it gets even better. So let's say you just have a normal button here, which you probably wouldn't do. You'd have some kind of component button. But let's say you did that. You'd have to come in here and give it a class name and do like background, I don't know, like blue 400. And then let me add a bunch of other classes here. You can see now I've got a bunch of them on here, and that's great. Well, it looks fine for this individual button. Not the most beautiful button I've ever seen, but you can see it actually works. The hard thing is if I want to use this again, I've got to kind of copy it and move it out. We might say, I know what I'll do. I'll create another component, and that way I can kind of keep it consistent. Well, that's fine. You come in here and maybe you create a button component right inside here. I've got this button example we'll look at in a second, and you use it throughout, and suddenly you realize, you know what, I need different types of buttons. And so you start to kind of play around with what that could look like. So you've got a button example component now, and you add that in. Let me go ahead and save this and pull this up over here. You can see what we've done is defined a bunch of different options for like a primary, a secondary, and a tertiary button. I have different button sizes, and then you can see I've even typed this out, and down here below, I've got this kind of mangled mess of classes. It does work, however. If I come back over this way, you can see I've got a secondary variant, and now it looks really nice. It's using that. I can even come and tab to this. It doesn't have the most amazing styling, but you know, it's usable. The hard thing is this ends up being a little bit tough to work with. And then let's say you come in here and say, you know what, now what I want is an actual icon. So maybe you come over here and you say, let's drop an icon directly in here. So you drop an SVG icon in here, and now suddenly it's not quite square. So you've got to adjust your button example to allow for now another type. So maybe you have a square type, but you still want these primary on it. So you want the primary, but you want the size like maybe small or medium or large, and allow that to be flexible, but you want it to be square kind of no matter what. So maybe you have a primary icon and a secondary icon, and you can see how very quickly this kind of gets out of hand. Well, Class Variance Authority gives us power to be able to basically use styles we've already chosen to basically output new different options. Now, before we get going too far, I do want to just make a note that I'm doing a fundraiser during the month of September for Children's Cancer Research Hospital. I've got a bunch of cool things to give away to anybody who gives to it. You've got a Coca.js license, a Wallaby.js license, and a Cloud Cannon team plant. If you're interested in those, stick around to the end of the video and you can figure out how you might be able to win one with a simple donation. Okay, let's come back up here, and we're going to look first of all at this Class Variance Authority. Now, this is the actual website, and I'll leave a link in the description. I think Joe Bell, who's the creator of this, now has access to the CVA NPM like slot and is eventually going to move this over there once he hits his next version. But all that to say, you can come over here and just install this, and it depends on kind of what you're using. You can see they've got a bunch of different examples from 11D to Astro to React to Svelte to Vue to a bunch of other things. I'm using NPM, so I'm going to go ahead and grab this right here, and let's just go ahead and install this. Now, that's really all you have to do, but you can see here that I am using Tailwind, so you can do additional things if you'd like to here. So for instance, you can add the IntelliSense for CSS, which you should be using if you're using Tailwind in VS Code, and you can add these changes to your setting.json file. So let me come in here and I can look for my settings.json file, and I'll just drop here to the bottom and drop this in. This gives you autocomplete inside of CVA, which is the actual function you're going to be writing everything in. So it makes it a little bit easier as you're typing out Tailwind classes. So that's really all you have to do, and you can see how very quickly you get up and running. Now, they also mentioned that if you want to be able to merge items, you can add the Tailwind merge package, again, if you're using Tailwind, and I'll show you why we want to do that, and we'll implement that here in a little bit. So first of all, let's go ahead and look at the different options available to you. You can see here what you're doing is you're basically importing this function, and then you're passing two things to it. First of all, you have your default number of classes. So these can be either in an array or just a string, but you're saying, hey, I want these to be true for every single button, no matter what. Then you can pass in an object, and that can have a few things. You have variance, and here they have like intent. This should be primary, secondary, and they have size as options inside of there. So that's variance. You can also have compound variance. I'll talk about those in a second. And finally, default variance. Those are easy to understand. All these are saying is basically this is what I want it to be if they don't pass anything in. So really easy and quick to get started with. Now I mentioned compound variance, and what this does is says, hey, if they've already selected primary and medium, which in this case happen to also be the defaults, then go ahead and add this class. And you can add additional classes based on what people have already selected. So it allows you to kind of like give superpowers to your different variants. But again, everything stays within your UI system. So what I want to do now is look at one example that they give you, and then we're going to build out our own from scratch. So let's first of all replace all this over here with the example they give us here. We're going to use Tailwind CSS since that's what I'm using here, and I'll just jump over here to GitHub to check it out. So let's go ahead and copy this just like this, and I'm going to come over here and do like button CVA or something like that, .tsx. All right, and then we'll just drop all this in here, and let's go ahead and get this back up and running with npm run dev. Okay, so if I pull this up over this way, you can see we've got that plus that we started with. I'm going to jump over here to the app.tsx and close down the sidebar. And then let's go ahead and get rid of this for now. And then let's pull in that button that we just added. We'll say something like learn more. Okay, so there we go. We've got our basic version right over here. Now, if I jump back over this way, you'll see that I've got different options. I can do primary or secondary, and then I can change the sizing as well. Now, right now, remember, because I've got the primary and medium as the default, it's also giving me a class of uppercase. That's one of the superpowers that CVA gives you. If I jump back over here, though, I can just change the size to something like small. And suddenly, not only is it small, but also it's no longer uppercase because it's not combining those variants. Now, I want to do a couple things here. One, I want to build this out quite a bit more fully. And I want to just show you some of the other things you can do with something like this. Number two, I want to add Tailwind merge to it and show you the power of that. I'll also talk about another package that gives you additional powers here, and then finally point you to a UI library that does a lot of this by default, and it's kind of popularized CVA, at least to my knowledge. So first of all, right now, everything is getting this class of button. In fact, if I come over here, you can see that that's exactly what's happening here. Now, I'm not using this in any way, but you can see how you could set like a button for everything or BTN for everything. And then, for instance, if you're not using Tailwind, you might just say, hey, this primary, I just want it to be the string of like button primary or something like that. And you can see how it would add that to it. And if you're using something like the BEM styling syntax for your custom CSS, that would work just great. You can see if I save it here, that's exactly what we're getting, this button -- primary. Now, what I want to do is define a few different types of intents. But before we do that, let's go ahead and add a bunch of different custom styles up here. Now, this can be an array of strings or just a string. That's fine as well. So I'm going to replace this with an array of strings. And as soon as I save that, you can see that this is what's populating it no matter what else I add, whatever intents I add. Now, under this variance property, we've got a few different options. We've got the intent and we've got the size. So let's go ahead and customize these a bit as well. So let me go ahead and paste these all in, and then I'll walk you through what we've done. We've got a primary, we've got a secondary, and let's go ahead and add a tertiary. Next, just like we've got over here, we're going to add some sizes. I'm going to paste these in as well, small, medium, and extra large. Now, right now you can see that this is yelling at us because both of these say medium and they just should say MD, since that's how I happen to write this ahead of time. Because I changed the name of that size option, I need to come over here as well and say something like small. Okay, so there we go. We've got this up and running. Now you can see that I've added a bunch of styling. You can see I can even come in here and tab through it like this. And then suddenly I can actually see that outline showing up, more of a custom look. So that's working, but let's go ahead and check the intent. So here we're going to say that this needs to be secondary, and there we go. We have like an outline version. And then I also have, what was it, tertiary? And that should work just the same. It's kind of like a ghost style button here. So that's all working great. But what we're going to do is also come in here and just surround this with a span, and then we'll add another span and just add the HTML character for this arrow. So you can see how they're set next to each other, and that's because I have this default flex gap 2 item center, justify center, and that's all kind of hugging it all together. You can see then that the only thing I'm really setting here is basically colors. So I'm setting different colors based on whether it's primary, and I'm thinking about all the different states that may be available. Same thing here on secondary, and same thing on tertiary. So these are only colors. Then I can separate out my sizes right here, and that's exactly what I've done with both my text size, then also my padding, and even the height of that. So that way they stay consistent no matter kind of what's going on. In other words, if they have an icon or if they don't have an icon, they should look very similar. Now let's go ahead and switch back over here, and let's say that I replace all of this with that SVG. Now when I save it, you can see it's not a perfect square, and maybe that's what I want, but I don't have any setting over here that would allow for that. So I could come over here, and I can maybe set another one here, a size that would say icon. However, I might want icons that can also be small, medium, large, or extra large. So how would I adjust for that? Well, that's where this compound variance comes into play. I don't need to uppercase mine, so I'm going to remove all this. And then let's come up top here and define one more different option. So in these variants, I also want to have something called button type. And this will just be either a button, which will be nothing, no strings at all, or it will be an icon. This icon, I'm going to set some other styles here. This would be like PX0, so no padding either direction. And I also want this to be rounded of full. Now, just a reminder that if you're not getting this IntelliSense and you are writing with Tailwind, you might need to go and change your VSCode settings like I showed earlier. Now, with all that said, what I want is when I select icon as a type, I want to select this and basically override any of these styles for padding, but I want to leave the min height alone. I do want to use the small, the medium, the large, and the extra large, though, to set the size of my icon. Now, there are lots of different ways you could do this. The way I came up with offhand was to add these as compound variants, just to kind of show you the power of those. So you can see that if I have a button type of icon and a size of small, I'm going to manually hard code these values. Same thing with medium, same thing with large, and same thing with extra large. Now, I do need to come in here and provide a default variant type here for the button type, and this I'm just going to set to button by default. Now, if I come down here, you can see that I've got class name, intent, size. I also then need to add button type. And all these are just being passed along here. Now, obviously, there's more you could do with this. For instance, you could pass along now there's a lot more you could do with this button, and I will show you a library at the end that does that for you and kind of gives you examples of how to make this even more robust. Now, there's one other thing we need to think about, because even if I set this icon here, I'm just stacking up all of these paddings or these heights, and it's not removing these previous ones. Well, that's where we need to bring in that Tailwind merge library. But to show you the use case for that, let's say come over here, and I now want to set the button type to icon. And nothing has changed. Why is that? Well, let's come over here and open this up. And you can see here that I've got a padding 1.5 and a padding X of 3. So what's going on? Well, if I come back over here, you can see that that is this stuff right here, padding there and padding there. So these are not being removed at all, even though I have this padding X of 0 that I want it to be added to it. Well, let's come down here. What I need to do is spread these in as well. Now I've got the button, I'm passing in the intent, the size. I also then need to pass in the button type, and then finally the class name. Now this may look like it's working, but here's where it gets tricky, and that's why I wanted to walk you through this. I have a padding X of 3, and I have a padding Y of 1.5, but I also have a padding X of 0. Now, I've done a video on this before, but the Tailwind merge package is super helpful for actually removing styles that come earlier on. Because right now, the only reason this is overwriting it is because it comes lower down in the cascade the way it's currently being built. Now, when I go to actually build this, it may change the order of those classes. So what I want to do is add that Tailwind merge so it will remove those previous ones. So all I have to do is, let's pull over here and install this right here. So let me come in here. We're going to kill this, and I'll go ahead and install Tailwind merge. Now I'm going to grab this function right here, just like that. And now I'm going to do is come down this way, and I'm going to wrap this class right here with that Tailwind merge function. So you can see the result. I'm going to come over here. You can see all these right here. If I hit save, now it's going to remove those other ones. And in fact, the only thing I have now is padding X of 0. So the way this Tailwind merge library works is it takes in an order of items. Here I've got the intent, the size, the button type, and then the class name. And those basically set up the order of items. That means I can pass in things and override any of these styles if I want to. You probably wouldn't want to do this in a large project, because then you can just override everything you have. And the whole point in setting these up as kind of locked styles is to not be able to do that. But for instance, I could come in here and say like PX20, and then it expands all of a sudden because that comes after all the rest of them. Tailwind merge basically makes sure that any classes that come at the end win over any classes that come earlier. By setting this button type after all of those, what I've done is basically take the padding, that is default in the small size and remove it altogether. Same thing with the rounding from earlier, which I think was up here. I've actually removed it later on with this icon. Now the tailwind merge allows me to do that. Now the cool thing here is we can basically set this up so you can see kind of how all of them would work combined all at once. So to show you that, I'm going to jump back over here to the app, and let's go ahead and remove this button for now. I'm going to go ahead and drop in some sizes here and some button options just so we can quickly loop through all these. I'm going to change this up as well and bring in the button props, and I'll show you those in a second. I think this was primary actually, primary like that. And then finally, I'm going to come down inside here and I'm going to paste in a bunch of JSX. So if I did that all correctly, there you go. You can see that we've got all the different sizes. Now I'll show you what I did here in a second over in the code, but basically I wanted to show you the different options here. We've got tertiary, secondary, and primary buttons. Now I might actually change the names of these just to make them a little cleaner as far as what they are. Let's call this one outline maybe. Primary is fine there, and then we'll call this ghost. How about that? Which means I also need to come over here and do the same. So let me change those. Let's change this to outline just to make it a little bit cleaner as far as what these things look like, and then ghost. Okay, so with that said, if I come over here, you can see that I've now got all the different variations off that one component. So here, this one is small and it's primary. This one is medium and primary, large, extra large, and this is disabled. I actually have settings for that, and you can see how they just tab nicely right through them. I've also got icons using the same things. Then I've got outline. All that is changing the different variant, and suddenly I've got a whole huge list of different options here for icons or for buttons, all based off my one component. Now, all I've done over here is basically take these and say, hey, give me a list of 5 items that have to match this button size type, and then same thing here on the intent. I want it to have primary, outline, or ghost, and then I'm just looping through those down here below. And basically, if they're buttons, I'm adding in learn more with that arrow, and if they're icons, I'm just making sure that I've set the intent to be an icon or the button type to be an icon, and I've set the final one to be disabled, just like I did with the buttons. So that's all we're doing is looping through them so you can kind of see all of them all at once. So if you're interested in using the class variance authority, I think it's really helpful for kind of keeping you in check when you're writing styles and making sure that you don't kind of break out of the bounds of your design system. Now, I did mention I wanted to point out a library and then also a UI library. The library is the CLSX, and this is something they actually recommend in the CVA library. Essentially what it does is it allows you to use functions and also sets, I think, and maps. It also lets you be a little bit more expressive when it comes to adding things based on whether or not some properties have been passed in. So it combines classes in a smart way. That's also used in the library I want to point out, which is the shadcn UI. Now, I haven't yet done a video on it, but all they do is take this cn function, which is combining that CLSX in the tailwind merge and wrapping everything. You can see that they're using CVA right here to pass in a bunch of default styles, and then finally to provide a bunch of different variants, sizes, defaults, and then they actually go a step further and use Radix UI to do a bunch of other things. You can see they're forwarding the ref for each of these. It's a little bit more of an advanced one than what we've been doing. A lot of people have been using the CVA library, the CLSX, and the Tailwind Merge because they've seen it shown here. Now, a few weeks ago, I mentioned this shadcn UI library and mentioned I may do a video on it, but I've seen so many great videos on it, I don't know that I can add a whole lot. So I thought it might help instead to kind of talk through the thinking of why it's being used the way it is and the different things that are going together to build out such a robust library. Well, I hope this was a big help in understanding how CVA works, the thinking behind it, how it constrains you and also gives you powers as you write your CSS. Now, again, you don't have to use Tailwind. You could easily just do this with CSS itself, but you can see how something like Tailwind is especially fit for this. If you're interested in the finished code here, you can check out the GitHub link in the description. Just make sure you look at the finalized branch. Hey, well, thank you so much for watching. I will catch you in the next one. Happy coding. Hey, real quick, while I have you, during the month of September, which is Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, I'm joining a fundraiser to raise money for St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. If you donate, you have a chance to win some amazing items thanks to some generous sponsors. I have 5 licenses of Quokka Pro and Wallaby Pro code editor extensions. They're worth like $55 and $135 respectively. I also have 4 2-year team licenses from Cloud Cannon, the static site generator CMS, worth about $6,000 each. Now, St. Jude leads the way the world understands, treats, and defeats childhood cancer. St. Jude helps cure cancer in 2 ways. First, they care for families without any cost to the family itself, for treatment, for travel, for housing, for food, for anything. Second, they're a research hospital, and they openly share their research with other doctors and scientists. Treatments invented at St. Jude have helped increase the overall childhood cancer survival rate from 20% to more than 80% since it opened more than 50 years ago. Like I mentioned, the teams behind Wallaby.js and CloudCannon have donated free licenses to their amazing software for me to give away as an added incentive for us to raise funds. Now, how would you win one of these giveaways? Visit the site linked in the description and click the donate button. Then, and this is important, forward me an email copy of your receipt at chris@codinginpublic.dev. I'll reply with a donor code so that you can reference it at the end of the month during our public drawing. I'll do a live stream on Friday, October 6th, 2023, and randomly generate those winner codes and display them on the screen. Now, just to be clear, donating does not guarantee you will win a giveaway. Each dollar you donate will earn you one raffle ticket. Winners will then be announced at the end of the campaign during that live stream. Finally, I want to say a huge thanks to Mike and Steven of Relay.fm, a podcast network I followed for a long time. They've made it very easy to set up a fundraiser attached to theirs during the month of September. Now, you're welcome to check out their story and see how our collective efforts over the last few years have helped raise resources for St. Jude. Let's defeat childhood cancer together.